Hello, my granddaughters. Today we're cooking from Bread Illustrated, the book by America's Test Kitchen. This is the third recipe on page 48 called brown soda bread. It says it's going to take about 45 minutes to bake. Going to have about half an hour, it looks like, of prep time. I've got all the ingredients scattered here on the counter. I was going to put everything into little cups and whatnot, do my mise en place. But other than mixing the buttermilk, the melted butter, and the sugar separately, everything gets put into one pan, so I'm going to measure everything once and not dirty any unnecessary smaller bowls and such, because it'll come together pretty easily, just straightforward like that. So let's go ahead and start at the beginning. I've read the recipe. I've got all my ingredients out, and the first step is to heat the oven, make sure that the rack is in this says middle lower position. And we're going to line a baking sheet with parchment paper. So I'll check the oven. That looks like middle lower to me. We'll turn it on. And we'll set our timer. Now, if you happen to be someone other than one of my granddaughters watching this, please be aware that I'm not a professional cook by any means, although I have cooked professionally in my life. I haven't done it in a long time. And I'm following this book, and my idea is to bake every one of the 100 or so recipes in it, and to take a video of myself doing it, so that when my granddaughter wants to bake something, she can refer to this video and hopefully maybe learn something about what to do, and along the way probably things that she ought not to do, because I'm sure that I'll make a mistake here or there. So anyway, without any further ado, let's get to work. So we're going to line a baking sheet with parchment paper. I've got the oven turned on, preheating to 400 degrees. I use a gas oven. I know there's some controversy now about the health of gas ovens. I've read it. I'm not overly concerned. We don't have any small children in the house here. And I usually vent the house. I've got windows open in the dining room, which is right over there. So simple enough. That's done. It doesn't say to do this, but I'm going to anyway. I'm going to spray a little bit of vegetable spray on my parchment. Better safe than sorry. And now we're going to mix our dry ingredients. We'll just start at the top. It says 2 cups or 10 ounces of all-purpose flour. So I zero my scale out with the bowl on top. So right now this weighs 0. So I need 10 ounces, 2 cups of flour. I use King Arthur flour, and the King Arthur website says that a cup of flour weighs about 113 grams. So 2 cups would be 227. I'm going to call it 230 grams. That's actually less than 10 ounces, but I prefer to go with gram weight, and King Arthur makes the flour, so I'll go with their estimates of what the weight is. Alright, so that's the all-purpose. How clever is that? This is an OXO, they call it a pop container, and now the top is sealed. Isn't that cool? And each one comes with this little scoop that mounts there, so you never have to go digging for it. Alright, enough of a pitch for that. 8 1/4 ounces of whole wheat flour, 1 1/2 cups. Same thing. So 115 plus half of that is 57.5, so that's 172.5. So I'm going to zero out my scale, and I'll go somewhere around 172. And that looks like 173, close enough. And next on the list, 1/4 cup, 1 1/2 ounces of wheat germ, 1/4 cup of wheat germ, 1 1/2 ounces would be about 42 grams, 43 grams. almost there. Here we go. 44 grams. That's close enough for government work. 1.5 teaspoons of salt. So with little stuff like this, it's kind of pointless to weigh it out because it's just easier to use a dry measure. Trying to weigh out 5 grams and stuff just gets tedious. 1 teaspoon of baking powder. And 1 teaspoon of baking soda. Level teaspoons of each. Okay, that's the dry ingredients. So I'm going to move this stuff to behind me because I'm done with it. I'm so done with it. And we'll whisk this together. You see, this is why they call it brown bread, because it's brown. Clever. All right. We'll whisk all this together. As usual, I have this nagging fear that I haven't really turned on the camera and that I'm not talking to anybody. I'm just talking to myself in the kitchen, which, if there's anybody walking by, the windows are open, they must think that I'm crazy. And they wouldn't be wrong. So there you go. They want this butter to be melted, so I'm going to melt the butter next and then mix the sugar with the buttermilk. Alright, that looks sufficiently whisked. Gets out of my way if you don't mind. This is 4 tablespoons, so I'll take 1 tablespoon off. Put the rest of it in the dish. And put this in the microwave. So that's that. Now we'll add the buttermilk to the bowl. How much buttermilk do I need? 1 3/4 cups. So that's going to be 240 plus 180 is 420. Too much. $4.20. And the sugar is 3 tablespoons. Which is 45 grams. You know, if you end up with a little more sugar in the bowl than you're supposed to have, what's the worst that can happen? It's going to be a little bit sweeter. Probably live with that. 45 grams of sugar. Butter's almost ready. We'll do another 15 seconds. So, the oven's at 400. It says to stir this until this is just melted. I mean, the sugar is just melted in with the buttermilk. Obviously the butter's melted going in. So this reminds me very much of a biscuit recipe. The difference being that with a biscuit you don't melt the butter, you cut the butter in cold like you would if it was a pastry dough. But all the other ingredients, it's pretty much a biscuit dough. Good. Throw a little on the counter. Nothing wrong with that. It says, using a rubber spatula, gently fold this into that and make sure you get all the dry ingredients wet. Don't overmix it. If you overmix it, it's going to be tough. Nobody wants tough Irish brown butter bread. Well, maybe somebody does, but not me. And we'll mix. Here we go. Using a nice silicone rubber spatula. Helps get the stuff off the side of the bowl. Kind of using a folding motion. It should just come together. It's not going to be like batter. It's going to be more like a, should I say it? Biscuit dough. And let's see what we got. So the other thing to do is don't think you can make this ahead. So I don't know if you can see, I've got 2 loaves of bread here that'll be going into the oven, I don't know, soon. But learning how to bake bread, I've come to understand that the process of gluten forming in bread is a result of the flour being hydrated. In other words, having liquid added to flour. So typically water or milk you add to flour, and it causes the 2 different proteins that are in flour to come together and make gluten, which is what gives dough its elasticity so that it can hold its shape like that, right? Because before this bakes, you could punch that down, but once you bake it, that structure is going to be gelatinized. It'll be solid. But the reason that the dough rises is because as the yeast is producing the carbon dioxide, the gluten has formed a network that's not unlike what you see if you look at styrofoam, and you can see that there are bubbles of air that the plastic has trapped, and that's what gives styrofoam, or like memory foam, that's what gives it its springiness, gives styrofoam its solidity, and bread is sort of like halfway between those. It's sort of solid once it's cooked because the gluten sets, and yet it's still kind of soft and springy if it's done right, because it's more like memory foam in that respect. But the point is that the gluten forms because of 2 things, one of which is the kneading of the dough. That makes the gluten get aligned so that it forms a good network. But the process of gluten forming itself happens by itself when flour and water or some other liquid are mixed together. It's just a natural thing that happens, which is why we bake bread with flour, because it lends itself to the process naturally, right? It's something that we discovered. It's not something we invented. So I'm telling you all this because if you let this dough sit for any length of time after it's been mixed, it'll start forming gluten, and it's going to, as a result, toughen up, like this bread is going to, right? That's how it'll hold its shape. It'll toughen up. But you don't really want tough, quick bread like this. This is a quick bread. It uses the chemical leaveners, the baking soda and the baking powder. It doesn't use yeast, so it doesn't really need that much in the way of gluten formation. That's kind of interesting. It's falling apart. I know. Okay. Don't want to overwork it. So like a biscuit, the taller this thing starts out, the taller it's going to be when it's cooked. If you flatten it out to where it's 3/4 of an inch, it'll puff up some because it's got baking powder and baking soda in it. But it won't puff up twice as high. It might rise half again as much. So this one will come out to like this tall, you know, half again as high. That's that. I'm gonna rinse my hands. And I'm going to get a knife, and I'm going to score the top. And I'm going to use my bench scraper. Put this in the oven, and I'm going to wait 40 to 50 minutes. I'm going to turn it halfway through, take it out, let it cool for about 3 hours, and that'll be that. So I'll check on it when I turn it, and I'll snap a picture then, and I'll video when I take it out of the oven. So that'll be next. We're halfway through. And you can see this is really rising up. Looks awesome. Looks awesome. All right, the timer went off. Let's see what we got. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. That looks awesome. That looks awesome. Let's put this on a cooling rack. There is no spoon. I need 3 hands.